Hey, what's up you guys? It's Dorothy and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, thank you for stopping by. Don't forget to give this video a big thumbs up. Comment down below what you want to see in the future. Click that subscribe button and turn on my post notifications. That way you get notified every time I post about whichever book we are reading at the time. In today's video, we are going into part 2 of chapter 48, which is the last chapter of the whole book. So let's get right into it because I know y'all are on edge and so am I. This video may contain sensitive topics and foul language. If you do not wish to continue, please click off of the video now. You have been warned. Alrighty, here we go. Becca's voice came to Pip loud and garnished, a shrieking echo switching from ear to ear. Pip pushed up from her chair, but her left leg was too weak. It gave out under her, and she crashed into the kitchen island. Something smashed and pieces were flying around like jagged clouds, and up as the world spun around her. The room lurched, and Pip stumbled over to the sink, leaned into it, and rammed her fingers down her throat. She vomited, and it was dark brown and stinging, and she vomited again. A voice came to her from somewhere near and someone far. "I'll work something out. I have to. There's no evidence. There's just you and what you know. I'm sorry. I don't want to do this." "Why couldn't you just leave it alone?" Pip staggered back and wiped her mouth. The room reeled again, and Becca was in front of her. "No!" Pip tried to scream, but her voice got lost somewhere inside. She hurtled back and sidestepped around the island. Her fingers bit into one of the stools to keep her on her feet. She grabbed it and launched it behind her. There was a head-splitting clatter as it took out Becca's legs. Pip ran into the wall in the hallway, ears ringing and shoulder throbbing. She leaned into it so it wouldn't mature away from her, and scaled her way to the front door. It wouldn't open, but then she blinked, and it vanished. She was outside somehow. It was dark and spinning, and there was something in the sky, bright and colorful mushrooms, and doom clouds and sprinkles, the fireworks, with a rippling the earth sound from the park. Pip picked up her feet and ran toward the bright colors into the woods. The trees were walking in a wooden two-step, and Pip's feet went numb, missing. Another sparkling sky roar, and it made her blind. Her hands out in front of her, her eyes, another crack, and Becca was in her face. She pushed, and Pip fell onto her back in the leaves and mud, and Becca was standing over her. Her hands splayed and reaching down, and a rush of energy came back to Pip. She kicked out hard, and now Becca was on the ground too, lost in the leaves. "I was trying to help you," Pip stammered. She turned and crawled, and her arms wanted to be legs, and her legs arms. She scrabbled up to her missing feet and ran away from Becca. More bombs were bursting, and it was the end of the world behind her. She grasped at the trees to help push her on as they danced and twirled at the falling sky. She grabbed a branch, and it felt like skin. It lunged out and gripped her with two hands. They fell onto the ground, and they rolled. Pip's head smashed against a tangled set of roots, a sneaking trail of wet down her face, the iron bite of blood in her mouth. The world went dark again as the redness pulled by her eyes, and then Becca was sitting on her, and there was something cold around Pip's neck. She reached up to feel it with fingers, but her own wouldn't work. She couldn't pry them off. "Please," the word squeezed out of her, and the air wouldn't come back. Her arms were stuck in the leaves, and they wouldn't listen to her. They wouldn't move. She looked up into Becca's eyes. "She knows where to put you, where they'll never find you, in a dark place with the bones of Andy Bell." Her arms and legs were gone, and she was following. "I wish someone like you had been there for me," Becca cried. "All I had was Andy. She was my only escape from my dad. She was my only hope after Max, and she didn't care. Maybe she never had. Now I'm stuck in this thing, and there's no way out except this. I don't want to do this. I'm sorry." Pip couldn't remember now what it felt like to breathe. Her eyes were splitting, and there was fire in the cracks. Fairview was being swallowed by darkness, but those rainbow sparks in the night were nice to look at. One last nice thing to send you on before it all goes black. And as it did, she felt the cold fingers loosen and come away. The first breath ripped and snugged and sucked it down. The blackness pulled back. The sounds grew on earth. "I can't do it," Becca said, moving her hands back to hug herself. "I can't." Then a crash of rustling footsteps and a shadow leaped over them, and Becca was dragged off. More sounds, shouting and screaming, and "You're okay, Pickle." Pip turned her hand, and her dad was pinning Becca down to the ground while she struggled and cried. And there was another person behind her. Pip sitting up, but she was a river and couldn't be held. "Breathe, Sarge," Ravi said, stroking her hair. We're here now." "Ravi, what's wrong with her?" "Hypnol," Pip whispered, looking up him. "Hypnol in tea. Ravi, call an ambulance now. Call the police." The sounds went away again, and it was just the colors and Ravi's voice vibrating in his chest. and threw her back to the outer edge of all sense. She let Andy die, Pip said, or thought she said, but we have to let her go. It's not fair, not fair. Fairview blinked. I might not remember. I might get amnesia. She's in septic tank. Farmhouse, Sycamore, that's where. It's okay, Pip, Robbie said, holding her so she didn't fall off the world. It's okay. It's all over now. I've got you. How did you find me? Your tracking device is still on, Robbie said, showing her a fuzzy jumping screen with an orange blip on the Find My Friends map. As soon as I saw you here, I knew. Fairview blinked. It's okay. I've got you, Pip. You're going to be okay. Blink. They were talking again, Robbie and her dad, but not in the words she could hear. In the scratching of ants, she couldn't see them anymore. Pip's eyes were in the sky. The fireworks were rupturing inside, flower sprays of Armageddon, and then she was a person again, on the cold, damp ground, Robbie's breath in her ear, and though the trees were flashing red and blue, lights spewing black uniforms, Pip watched them both, the flashes and the fireworks. No sound. She just heard rattlesnake breath and the sparks in the lights, red and blue, bled, and rue, and that's the end of the book. I know, but luckily for us, there's a little extra part, but okay, so here's the extra part. It says 2 months later. There are a lot of people out here, Sarge. Really? Yeah, like 200. She could hear them all, like the clattering of chairs as people took their seats in the assembly hall. She was waiting in the wings behind her presentation notes, clutched in her hands, the sweat from her fingers smudging the ink. Everyone else in her grade had done their capstone project presentations earlier in the week to small classrooms of people, but the school thought it would be a good idea to turn Pip's presentation into a big event. As the principal had put it, Pip had been given no choice in the matter. The school had advertised it online and in the Fairview Mail. They invited members of the press to attend. Pip had seen a CNN van pull up earlier, and the equipment and cameras unpacked. Are you nervous? Robbie said. Are you asking obvious questions? When the Andy Bell story broke, it had been in the national newspapers and on TV stations for weeks. It was in the height of all the craziness that Pip had her interview for Columbia. The two interviewers had recognized her from the news, swiping aside their notes of formal questions, asking her instead about the case. Her acceptance letter was one of the very first to come in. Fairview Secret and Mysteries had followed Pip so closely in those weeks she had to wear them like a new skin, except the one that she had buried deep down, the one she'd keep forever to save Kara, her best friend who'd never once left Pip's side in the hospital. Can I come over later? Robbie asked her. Sure, Kara and Naomi are coming for dinner too. They heard a sharp patter of heels and Miss Morgan appeared, fighting through the curtain. I think we're just about ready when you are, Pippa. Okay, I'll be out in a minute. Well, Robbie said, when they were alone again, I better go and take my seat. He smiled, put his hands on the back of her neck, fingers in her hair, and leaned in to press his forehead against hers. He told her before that he did it to take away half of her sadness, but her headache, half of her nerves before her Columbia interview, because half-less of a bad thing meant there was room for half good. He kissed her, and she glowed with the feeling, the one with wings. You bring the rain down on them, Pip. I will. He said, turning one last time before the door, and don't tell them the only reason you started this project because you fancied me, you know. Think of a more noble reason. Get out of here. Don't feel bad. You couldn't help yourself. I'm ravishing, he grinned. Get it, Robbie? Ravishing, Robbie Singh. Sign of a great joke, having to explain it. She said, now go. She waited another minute, muttering the first lines of her speech under her breath, and then she walked out on stage. People weren't quite sure what to do. About half the audience started clapping politely, the news cameras panning to them, and the other half sat deadly still, a sea of eyes stalking her as she moved. From the front row, her dad stood up and whistled with his finger, shouting, Get 'em, Pips! Her mom swiftly pulled him back down and exchanged a look with Naisha Singh sitting beside her. Pip strode over to the principal's lectern and flattened her speech down on top. Hi, she said. And the microphone screeched, cutting through the silent room. Cameras clicked. My name is Pip, and for my senior capstone project, I decided to solve a murder. I did not know that this project would put myself, my friends, and my family in danger, and would end up changing many lives. But what I do know, she paused, is that this town and the national media still don't really understand what happened here at all. I'm not the prodigy student who found the truth for Andy Bell, keeping Sal Singh and his brother Ravi relegated to small side notes. This project began with Sal, to find the truth for him. Pip's eyes found Stanley Forbes in the third row, scribbling away in an open notebook. She still wondered about him and the other names on her persons of interest list, the other lives and secrets that had crisscrossed this case. Fairview still had its mysteries, unturned stones, and unanswered questions. This town had too many dark corners. Pip had learned to accept that she couldn't shine a light into each and every one. Stanley was sitting just behind her friends, Kara's face absent among them. As brave as she had been, though, everything she decided today would have been too hard for her. I couldn't have fathomed, Pip continued, that when this project was over, it would end with 4 people in handcuffs and 1 being set free after 5 years in a makeshift prison cell. Elliot Ward has pleaded guilty to first-degree murder of Sal Singh and to kidnapping in the first degree of Isla Jordan. His hearing is next week. Becca Bell will face trial later this year for the charge of criminally negligent homicide, illegal disposal of a body, and tampering with evidence. Max Hastings has been charged with 4 counts of sexual assault and 2 counts of rape and will also be tried later this year. And Howie Bowers has pled guilty to the charge of possession with the intent to sell. She shuffled her notes and cleared her throat. So why did the events on Friday, April 18th, 2014 happen? The way I see it, there are a handful of people who carry the blame for what happened the night and the days following. Morally, if not all criminally, these are Elliot Ward, Howard Bowers, Max Hastings, Becca Bell, and Jason Bell. And do not forget Andy herself. You have cast her as your beautiful victim and willfully overlook the other layers of her character because they don't comfortably fit your narrative. But this is the truth. Andy Bell was a bully who used emotional blackmail to get what she wanted. She sold drugs without care or regard for how they might be used. We will never know if she knew she was facilitating drug-assisted sexual assault, but when confronted with the truth by her own sister, she could not find it in her to show compassion. And yet, when we look closer behind this true Andy, we find a girl who was vulnerable and self-conscious. Andy grew up being taught by her father that the only value she had was in the way she looked and how strongly she was desired. Home for her was a place where she was criticized and belittled. Andy never got the chance to become the young woman she might have been away from that house, to decide for herself what made her valuable and what future she wanted. And though this story does have its monsters, I found that it is not one that can be so easily divided into the good and the bad. In the end, this was a story about people in their different shades of desperation crashing up against each other. But there was one person who was good until the very end, and his name was Sal Singh. Pip looked up, then, her eyes going straight to Ravi sitting between his parents. The thing is, she said, I didn't do this project alone, and the guidelines require I couldn't have done it on my own, so I guess you're going to have to disqualify me. A few people gasped in the audience, Miss Morgan loudly among them, a few titters of laughter. I couldn't have solved this case without Ravi Singh. In fact, I wouldn't have survived it. So if anyone should speak about how kind Sal Singh was, now that you're all finally listening, it's his brother. Ravi stared at her from his seat, his eyes wide, and in that tailing off way that she loved, but she knew he needed this, and he needed it too. She beckoned with a tilt of her head, and Ravi got to his feet. Her dad stood up too, whistling with his fingers again and smacking his big hands loudly together. Some of the students in the audience joined in, clapping as Ravi jogged up the steps to the stage and walked over to the lectern. Pip moved back from the microphone as Ravi joined her. He winked at her, and Pip felt a flash of pride as she watched him step up to the lectern, scratching the back of his head. He told her just yesterday that he was going to retake school exams so he could go on to study law. Hi, Ravi said, and the microphone screeched for him too. I wasn't expecting this, but it's not every day a girl throws away a guaranteed A for you. There was a quiet ripple of laughter, but I guess I don't need preparation to talk about Sal. I've been preparing for nearly 6 years now. My brother wasn't just a good person, he was one of the best. He was kind, exceptionally kind, always helping people, and nothing was ever too much trouble. He was selfless. I remember this one time when we were kids. I spilled chocolate milk all over the carpet, and Sal took the fall for me so I wouldn't get in trouble. Sorry, Mom. Guess you had to find out sometime. More chuckles from the audience. Sal was cheeky. He had the most ridiculous laugh. You couldn't help but join in. And oh yeah, he used to spend hours drawing these comics for me to read in bed because I wasn't a great sleeper. I still have them. And damn was Sal clever. I know he wouldn't have done incredible things with his life if it hadn't been taken away from him. The world will never be as bright without him in it. Ravi's voice cracked, and I wish I'd been able to tell him all this when he was alive. Tell him he was the best big brother anyone could ever have wished for. But at least I can say it now on this stage, and now know that this time everyone will believe me. He looked back at Pip, his eyes shining, reaching out for her. She drew forward to stand with him, leaning into the microphone to say her final lines. But there was one final player in this story, Fairview, and it's us. Collectively, we turned a beautiful life into a myth of a monster. We turned a family home into a ghost house, and from now on, we must do better. Pip reached down behind the lectern for Ravi's hand, sliding her fingers between his. Their intertwined hands became a new living thing, her fingers perfect against the dips of his knuckles, like they'd grown just that way to fit together. Any questions? And that is the end of the book. I think it is, at least. Oh. No, there's another section. Okay, we'll get into that too. Goodness, it's called After and Before. I didn't know about this one. You think you'd know what a killer sounds like, that their lies would have a different texture, some barely perceptible shift, a voice that thickens, grows sharp and uneven as the truth slips beneath the jagged edges. You'd think that, wouldn't you? Everyone thinks that they know if it came down to it, but Pip hadn't. It's such a tragedy what happened in the end. Sitting across from him, looking into his kind crinkled eyes, her phone between them recording every sound and sniff and throat-clearing huff. She believed it all, every word. Pip traced her fingers across the trackpad, skipping the audio file back again. It's such a tragedy what happened in the end. Elliot Ward's voice rang out from the speakers once more, filling her darkened bedroom, filling her head. Stop. Click. Repeat. It's such a tragedy what happened in the end. She listened to it maybe 100 times, maybe even 1,000, and there was nothing, no giveaway, no change as she slipped between lies and half-truths. The man she once looked as an almost father. But then Pip had lied to, hadn't she? She could tell herself she'd done it to protect the people she loved, but that wasn't the exact reason Elliot gave. Pip ignored the voice in her head. The truth was out, most of it, and that's the thing she clung to. She kept going on to the other part that made her hair stand on end. And do you think Sal killed Andy? Asked Pip's voice from the past. He was such a lovely kid, but considering the evidence, I don't see how he couldn't have done it. As wrong as it feels, I think he must have. There's no other explanation. Pip's door pushed open, inward with a smack. What are you doing? Interrupted a voice from right now. One thing lifted with a smirk because he knew damn well what she was doing. You scared me, Ravi, she said, annoyed, darting forward to pause the audio. Ravi didn't need to hear Elliot Ward's voice, not ever again. You're sitting here in the dark listening to that, but I'm the scary one? Ravi said, flicking on the light, the yellow glow reflecting off the dark hair swept across his forehead. He pulled the face, the one that always got her, and Pip smiled because it was impossible not to. She wheeled back from her desk. How did you get in anyways? Your parents and Josh were on their way out with a giant Tupperware full of fresh-baked cookies. Oh, yes, she said. They're from Costco. Don't let my dad fool you. They're on a neighborly welcome duties. A young couple just moved into the Chen's houses down the street. Mom did the deal. The Greens, or maybe the Browns, can't remember. It was strange thinking of another family living in that house, new lives reshaping to fill in old spaces. Pip's friend Zach Chen had always lived there, 4 doors down, ever since Pip had moved here at the age of 5. It wasn't a real goodbye. She still saw Zach at school every day, but his parents had decided they could no longer live in this town. Now, after all that trouble, Pip was certain they considered her a large part of all of that trouble. Dinner 7:30, by the way, Ravi said, his voice suddenly skipping clumsily over the words. Pip looked at him. He was wearing his nicest shirt, and were those new shoes? She could smell aftershave too, and he stepped toward her, but he stopped short. Didn't kiss her on the forehead nor run through her hair. Instead, he sat on her bed fiddling with his hands. Meaning you're almost 2 hours early, Pip smiled. Yeah, he coughed. Why was he being awkward? It was their first Valentine's Day, and Ravi had booked them a table at the Siren, out of town. Pip's best friend Cara was convinced Ravi was going to ask Pip to be his girlfriend tonight. She said she'd put money on it. The thought made something in Pip's stomach swell, spilling its heart up onto her chest, but it might not be that. Valentine's Day was also Sal's birthday. Ravi's older brother would have turned 24 today if he'd had made it past 18. How far have you got? Ravi asked, nodding at her laptop, the audio editing software Audacity filling the screen with spiky blue lines. The whole story was there, contained within those blue lines, from the start of Pip's project to the very end. Every lie, every secret, even some of her own. And that is the very end of A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. Oh my goodness, we went on such an amazing and long journey, and I'm so glad that we figured out who killed Andy Bell, because that was a plot twister for me. But yeah, we'll get into book 2 as soon as possible. So yeah, bye.